The hammer never touched the nail. John Wayne was standing in the doorway of Dean Martin's dressing room at Paramount Studios, holding a prop hammer from the Western they'd just finished filming, when he made the comment that would end their friendship forever. It was October 1968, 3 months after Guy Crocetti had been laid to rest in Ohio, and Duke was feeling philosophical about masculinity, work ethic, and what separated real men from Hollywood pretenders. When he started talking about honest work versus sissy jobs, when he began mocking men who played with scissors and powder for a living, he had no idea that Dean's father had spent 40 years behind a barber's chair. What happened in the next 10 minutes wouldn't just destroy a legendary friendship, it would teach John Wayne that some lines should never be crossed, even by America's cowboy. The Paramount lot in October 1968 buzzed with the energy of multiple productions. Sound stages echoed with dialogue, costume departments churned out period pieces, and the commissary served as neutral ground where stars from different films could cross paths. Dean and Duke had just wrapped The Sons of Katie Elder, a western that had paired Dean's smooth charm with Wayne's rugged authority. The chemistry between them had been electric on screen, translating into a genuine friendship off camera. Duke's dressing room was larger than most apartments, all leather furniture and Western memorabilia. The walls displayed photographs of Wayne with presidents, cattle barons, and military heroes, a shrine to American masculinity as Duke understood it. Dean's dressing room directly across the hall was simpler, a comfortable chair, a mirror, and family photographs that included several of his father, Guy Crocetti, standing proudly in his white barber's coat. John Wayne was 59 that October, at the height of his cultural influence. He wasn't just a movie star. He was America's conscience, the embodiment of frontier values in an increasingly complex world. Duke believed deeply in the mythology he'd helped create, that men should work with their hands, solve problems with direct action, and never apologize for being tough. He'd built a career playing characters who lived by simple codes, and over the decades, those codes had become his personal philosophy. Dean Martin, at 51, represented something different. Where Duke was all righteous thunder, Dean was cool sophistication. Where Duke's masculinity was loud and aggressive, Dean's was quiet and confident. They'd gotten along well during filming, but beneath the surface lay fundamental differences about what it meant to be a man in America. Guy Crocetti had died that previous July, and his loss had hit Dean harder than most people realized. Guy had been more than just Dean's father. He'd been his first example of dignity, work ethic, and quiet strength. Italian immigrant who'd arrived in Steubenville, Ohio, with nothing but ambition and a willingness to work. Guy had built a successful barbershop through sheer determination. He'd worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week for 40 years, using his scissors and razor to feed his family and put his sons through school. The barbershop had been Guy's kingdom, a place where men from all walks of life came for grooming, conversation, and community. Guy had cut the hair of steelworkers, politicians, businessmen, and drifters, treating each customer with the same professional respect. He'd never been wealthy, never been famous, but he'd been proud of his work and the life he'd built with his hands. Dean had learned his first lessons about manhood in that barbershop, watching his father handle difficult customers with diplomacy, maintain his equipment with precision, and close up shop each night with the satisfaction of work well done. Guy Crocetti had been Dean's hero long before Hollywood made Dean famous. The confrontation began innocently enough. Duke had wandered into Dean's dressing room after their final scene, still energized from the day's shooting. He was in one of his philosophical moods, feeling the need to expound on the themes that had made their Western successful. "You know, Dean," Duke said, settling his bulk into the leather chair across from Dean's mirror. "There's something pure about making Westerns. They remind people what this country was built on. Real work, honest labor, men who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty." Dean nodded absently, removing his costume vest. He was tired, ready to go home, but Duke was just getting started. "Take the characters we played today," Duke continued. "Cowboys, ranchers, men who built something with their sweat and muscle. That's the kind of masculinity this country needs more of. None of this modern nonsense where men sit behind desks or play around with. Duke paused, searching for the right words to express his disdain for what he saw as the feminization of American manhood. "You know what I mean," he said finally. "Men these days are getting soft. They want clean jobs, easy money. They don't want to do real work anymore. Hell, half the guys in Hollywood would rather get manicures than change a tire." Dean looked up from hanging his costume, something cold flickering in his eyes. "What exactly do you consider real work, Duke?" Duke, missing the warning in Dean's tone, launched into his favorite lecture: physical work, building things, fixing things, making things with your hands, farming, construction, oil drilling, jobs that require strength and skill, not sitting around in some sissy occupation, playing with. He gestured dismissively, searching for examples of the kind of work he considered beneath a real man. "Playing with scissors and powder and making people look pretty." Duke continued with a snort. "What kind of man spends his day cutting hair and gossiping with housewives? That's women's work. Real men don't fiddle around with hair and perfume." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Dean had gone completely still, his hands motionless on his costume. Duke, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere, kept talking. Can you imagine?" Duke chuckled. "A grown man standing around all day with scissors and powder, making small talk about the weather while he trims some banker's sideburns. Where's the dignity in that? Where's the challenge? Any woman could do that job with a week's training." That was the moment Dean Martin's famous cool snapped. "My father was a barber." The words came out quiet, level, but they hit the room like thunder. Duke's mouth, which had been open to continue his monologue, snapped shut. The easy smile faded from his face as he processed what Dean had just said. "Dean, I didn't—" "My father," Dean continued, his voice still quiet, but carrying an edge that made Duke shift uncomfortably in his chair, "spent 40 years behind a barber's chair in Steubenville, Ohio. He worked 16-hour days, 6 days a week, to feed 4 kids and put them through school." Dean turned to face Duke fully now, and the expression on his face was unlike anything Duke had ever seen from him. Not anger. Something colder, more dangerous. "He came to this country from Italy with nothing but a pair of scissors and a willingness to work," Dean said. "He learned English by talking to his customers. He built his business one haircut at a time, treating every man who sat in his chair with respect and professionalism." Duke tried to recover, his face flushing red. "Dean, hell, I didn't know about your father. I was just making a general observation about sissy work." Dean interrupted. "About jobs that any woman could do with a week's training? About men who play with scissors and powder and gossip with housewives?" Each phrase hit Duke like a slap. He was beginning to realize the enormity of his mistake, but Dean wasn't finished. "Let me tell you what my father's sissy work involved," Dean continued, his voice getting slightly louder, but maintaining that dangerous calm. "He stood on his feet for 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. He maintained razors sharp enough to shave a man smooth without drawing blood. He memorized the names, families, and preferences of hundreds of customers." Dean walked closer to Duke, who had shrunk back in his chair. "He handled straight razors with the precision of a surgeon, hot towels with the timing of a choreographer, and difficult customers with the diplomacy of an ambassador. He could cut a perfect fade, trim a mustache to exact specifications, and give a shave so close it lasted 3 days." Duke was looking anywhere but at Dean's face, clearly wishing he could disappear. "And every night," Dean continued, "he went home with aching feet, sore hands, and a clear conscience because he'd provided an honest service for an honest wage. He never asked for handouts, never complained about the work, never looked down on any customer regardless of their station in life." The silence that followed was deafening. Duke, who had built a career playing confident, larger-than-life characters, looked smaller than Dean had ever seen him. "My father died 3 months ago," Dean said finally. "Cancer. I held his hand while he died, and you know what he was proud of? His work, the barber shop he'd built, the customers he'd served, the family he'd provided for through 40 years of what you just called sissy work." Duke's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but Dean held up a hand to stop him. "Duke, I've always respected you. I've admired your success, your dedication to your craft, the way you've represented American values on screen. But right now, sitting in this room, having just heard you mock my father's life's work as something beneath a real man, I'm wondering if you understand the first thing about what actually makes a man." Duke finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Dean, I'm sorry. I had no idea." "No, you didn't have any idea." Dean cut him off. "You've spent so much time playing cowboys and war heroes that you've forgotten that real heroism often happens in barber shops and factories and small businesses. Real strength isn't about how loud you can yell or how many cattle you can rope. It's about getting up every morning for 40 years and doing work that matters, even if nobody makes movies about it." Dean moved to his dressing table and picked up one of the photographs, his father standing in his white barber's coat, smiling proudly in front of his shop. "This man," Dean said, holding up the photograph, "raised 4 sons on a barber's salary. He sent 3 of us to college. He never missed a day of work unless he was physically unable to stand. He treated every customer like they mattered, regardless of whether they were steelworkers or bank presidents." Dean set the photograph down gently, like he was handling something sacred. "He taught me about dignity, about pride in work well done, about treating people with respect regardless of their station in life. Everything good I've ever done, every success I've achieved, every moment of character I've shown, it all came from watching a man you just called a sissy stand behind a barber's chair and serve his community with honor." Duke was staring at his boots now, his massive frame hunched over like a scolded child. The cowboy swagger that usually defined him had completely evaporated. "Dean, Duke started, but his voice broke. He tried again. "I was wrong. I was completely, utterly wrong. Your father sounds like he was a hell of a man." "He was," Dean said simply. "But you'll never know that, because you've decided that certain kinds of work aren't worthy of respect. You've bought into the same Hollywood nonsense that says only cowboys and soldiers and oil riggers are real men, while the barbers and tailors and shopkeepers who actually keep communities running are somehow less than." Dean began packing his personal items, clearly preparing to leave. Duke watched him desperately, knowing that something irreparable had been damaged. "Dean, please." "I spoke without thinking. You were just expressing your real opinions," Dean interrupted. "That's the problem, Duke. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was what you actually believe about the men who do the quiet, necessary work that keeps the world running." Dean paused at the door, looking back at Duke one final time. "My father never had to prove his masculinity by putting down other men's work. He was secure enough in who he was that he could treat every customer with dignity, regardless of their occupation. That's what real strength looks like, not needing to tear others down to build yourself up." With that, Dean Martin walked out of his dressing room, leaving John Wayne alone with his shame and the echo of words that would haunt him for years to come. The story of what happened in that dressing room spread quietly through Hollywood, not through gossip columns, but through the kind of whispered conversations that occur between people who understand they've witnessed something significant. Duke, to his credit, never tried to deny or downplay what had happened. When asked about it by close friends, he would simply say, "I learned something about respect that day. Cost me a friendship, but I learned it." Dean and Duke worked together once more after that day, but their relationship was never the same. The easy camaraderie they'd shared was gone, replaced by professional politeness. Duke tried several times to apologize more formally, but Dean was cordial and distant. The damage had been done, and some words can never be taken back. The irony was that John Wayne, who had built his career playing men of honor, had revealed a fundamental lack of understanding about what honor actually means. He had confused physical strength with moral strength, loud confidence with quiet dignity. In trying to celebrate traditional masculinity, he had denigrated the very qualities, hard work, service to others, quiet pride that actually define it. Dean Martin, who was often dismissed as just a smooth entertainer, had shown Duke what real strength looked like. It wasn't about swagger or volume or the ability to dominate a room. It was about the courage to stand up for the memory of a good man who had lived an honorable life, even when that man's work didn't fit someone else's narrow definition of masculinity. Years later, when John Wayne was dying of cancer, He made a point of seeking out Dean Martin at an industry function. Duke was frail by then, his famous voice reduced to a rasp, his massive frame diminished by illness. "Dean," he said quietly, pulling Dean aside, "I want you to know that I've thought about what happened between us every day since it occurred. Your father was a better man than I'll ever be, and you were right to defend him." Dean looked at the dying legend, the man who had defined American masculinity for generations, and saw not John Wayne the icon, but a human being seeking forgiveness. "Duke," Dean said simply, "he would have liked you. Despite everything, he would have seen the good in you and given you the best haircut of your life." It wasn't absolution, but it was grace, and sometimes grace is the most masculine thing a man can offer. The lesson of that October day in 1968 wasn't about barbering or acting or even friendship. It was about the danger of judging other people's lives by your own narrow standards. It was about the difference between playing a hero and being one. And it was about the fact that true strength often comes in quiet packages, like an Italian immigrant who spent 40 years serving his community one customer at a time, never asking for recognition, never needing to prove his worth by diminishing others. Guy Crocetti never met John Wayne, never knew that his son would one day have to defend his memory against a Hollywood icon's casual disdain. But in that dressing room confrontation, his legacy proved stronger than any movie cowboy's bluster, because the values he'd instilled in his son, dignity, respect for honest work, the courage to stand up for what's right, those values endure long after the last Western fades to black. In the end, the barber's son taught the cowboy star what it really means to be a man. And that lesson, learned too late to save their friendship, became part of John Wayne's own legacy, a reminder that even legends have something to learn about honor, respect, and the quiet heroism of everyday work.